It's so great to be able to be here to talk about this topic that I'm really passionate about the importance of having connection. And one of my goals today is, since I'm presenting after lunch, is to keep you awake. So if any of you fall asleep, you're going to make me feel really bad because I will have failed today. To think about my past self then. Anyway, this is such an important topic for caregivers, and it's not one that we hear talked about a lot in relation to caregivers. And so I put together this presentation because much of what you're hearing today is going to be super valuable, but this is super valuable as well, to think about the connections that we have in building these bridges to these important connections. Really, it's more about maintaining the bridges that you already had. So there's an analogy that we use with caregivers a lot, and maybe you've already heard it in one of your sessions today. It goes back to that principle that you learn on the airplane, where the stewardess tells you to put on your oxygen mask first before you assist anybody else. Because if you pass out because you don't have oxygen, you're no good to anyone else. And that principle is so true for caregivers as well. If you are not taking care of yourself, if you are not addressing your needs and you pass out, you are no good for your loved one that you're caring for. And so it's just a reminder to you that you need to be addressing your needs. And I'm going to be talking about your needs for connection. So the reason this whole conference is taking place is to support caregivers. We know how important caregivers are. And the reason that caregivers need support is because caregiving, although can have some great benefits and some wonderful things about it, is often very, very demanding. It's often very, very time consuming. Are you guys agreeing with me here? Any heads nodding? I'm sorry, having a hard time seeing you out there. It's often very, very stressful. And so that's what I wanted to start out with, is talking a little bit about stress. And I know Kara Dassel in her session a little while ago talked about it too. We can't talk about this enough because of how stress impacts us. So what we know is that a lot of stress can throw our bodies into what's called a fight or flight response. So when this happens, your body just kind of shuts down and starts, and your mind, you start to hyper-focus on the problem or the challenge that you're dealing with. And we like to use this example a lot. That bear in the woods, you're going along, you're minding your own business, you're on a nice hike, here comes the bear out of the woods. What happens? Well, in this crisis situation, I bet you're not listening to the birds tweeting in the trees anymore, unless they're shrieking vultures or something. You're not listening to that. You're not looking at how beautiful the sky is or the wonderful crunch of the leaves under your feet. What happens to you in this crisis situation? You just focus. You're just hyper-focused now on this crisis situation. It's a survival instinct of ours. But what we also know about stress is that this situation doesn't just happen when there are these one-time crisis situations. The bear goes off into the woods, you're fine, you go have lunch. It's not all about that. We also know that this fight or flight can get switched on and stay on when you're in any sort of situation where there's kind of like this chronic, ongoing low level of stress, or this feeling of being overwhelmed all of the time. This can put your body into this hyper-focused sort of fight or flight mode as well. So I use the word overwhelming. How many of you current or past caregivers would say that caregiving is sometimes overwhelming? Just a show of hands. It looks like most of you. So you've experienced that feeling before. So caregiving in many ways can mimic like a crisis situation, because all of a sudden your focus changes. Your lives change. You begin focusing on the needs of somebody else. You begin focusing on the tasks that need to be done every day. Your energy becomes focused in different directions. And so stress can become your norm without you even recognizing that it's happening. All of a sudden you're like this all of the time. So why am I talking about stress in a presentation about the importance of connection? Well, It's basically because when you go into this mode, this survival mode, where you're hyper-focused on this situation and taking care of it, things start to fall away. Things start to go by the wayside. And very frequently, those things that go by the wayside are your connections, your vital connections with other people in your life. Those connections that maybe sustained you before. So as part of this survival mode, we start to shut down on things that used to be a big part of our life before. So sometimes as a caregiver, we may start to feel like this turtle that's kind of pulled inside to weather the storm and to conserve their energy and to be safe. Got all this stuff going on. I don't know what to do with it all. I'm just going to pull in and just ignore a lot of things going on in my life. Or it might be like this, where you feel like you've got to build this big barrier around your life to protect you because you just can't handle one more thing coming in. So I'm going to put up this big barrier around me. And then your life starts to shrink a little bit. So I want to ask you a question right now, and I'm going to give you just a couple of moments to think about it as well, because it's important. So the question is, how has caregiving taken a toll on your connections with other people? So just think about that for a minute. So now I'm wondering if there's one or two brave people out there who would be willing to briefly tell us what your experience is, how caregiving has taken a toll on your relationships or connections with other people. Is there anybody who's willing to share? Got a couple over here.
I have me.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's coming with the microphone behind you, sneaking up.
Well, mine is fairly recent. My husband was just diagnosed in May, so it's very recent to me. So I know I have a long road ahead of me, but I find that when I'm talking to my therapist's sister, that it's always about me and about what's going on. And I forget to talk about her and the rest of the family. So I feel like I'm being self-centered or not that it's bad. She's there for me, but I find that my whole conversation is all about that now.
You're dwelling in that, you're circling in the drain.
Yes.
There on your problems. Thank you for sharing that. That's not actually one that I've heard before. So that's a really interesting. I can't really see well. There's somebody here as well.
Linda knows me well and knows what I've gone through with giving for both my parents. And the way it's affected my connections, I feel it's even affected connections with my kids, because my kids want time sometimes just with their mom and dad, not with their grandparents every single time they come over. And, I think my parents don't realize that sometimes they need to give me that space and time. And so it's had that and on friends who come over, the minute they hear someone's there, obviously they want to come up and join in, but it's kind of for a while, my kids actually stopped coming around because they were finding it difficult to have to always deal with. My dad has dementia and it's hard, but it's definitely kind of made me a little more isolated. So
thank you. That's a great insight. Another impact on relationships. Woman in orange here, yeah.
I care for my daughter who's 17, and she has a lot of physical things, but also sensory things. And so she is really sensitive to noise and smells and light. And so I find myself in the room with her, lights off, her headphones on, and I'm literally alone in the dark, even though she's there.
Wow.
Because anyway, but also it affects who I invite over, because if they have loud kids, sorry, like it's gonna be too hard. Or where we go, because she can't go somewhere where there might be somebody that has people that have a lot of perfume on. It really restricts our where we go and who interacts with us.
Yeah.
that shrinking process we're talking about. Thank you so much for sharing those. Those are really insightful things that kind of illustrate this point that caregiving does have an impact on your connections. And I have a couple of other things here that I threw up on the slide here that people have told me over the years. Friends and family have drifted away. Maybe you don't feel as fun as you used to feel, and maybe they're kind of sensing stuff. Like my friend Mandy here shared as well, that they're just like, they're not wanting to hang out in that same space that you're in. It's too hard to leave the house. How many of you experienced this? You may have walkers, you may have wheelchairs, you may have a person with dementia who's really, really hard to direct. No one understands what it's like for me. You may feel like you don't relate as well with other people out there. They're going off on their vacations and stuff, and that's not the place you're at in your life. And by the same token, other people can't quite look into your life and quite understand that anymore. So there becomes this disconnect. I have no time. This one kind of goes without saying because it does consume a lot of your time. Whoops. I'm so focused on my loved one that I've lost attention to myself. So you're just not paying attention to your own needs there. We already talked about that. Too exhausted, another big one. I'm short-tempered and driving other people away. So our first speaker mentioned this briefly, how we might start to build up resentments about the situation. This is perfectly normal. No guilt around this. This is normal. Your life has changed. You've given up a lot, and you might be starting to say things in your head like, why isn't this person helping more? Or this isn't how I expected my life to be. How did I end up here? That's normal. You're going to feel that way. But it can also drive other people away if you get stuck in that place. I've lost supports and it's difficult to build new ones. Honestly, how do you build new ones? We'll talk a little bit about different ways, but all of these things are super, super valid. And unfortunately, it's very, very common to see an impact on your connections with other people because, as I said, those connections shrink. So why is this important then? Why am I talking about connection at a caregiver conference? If you're just too busy and you're too exhausted to deal with other people, why should we even be thinking about it? Well, the answer is very simple, because our whole being as human beings is programmed to need other people. Way back, and I Googled this right before the presentation because I wasn't sure, in 350 AD, the philosopher Aristotle said it very succinctly. He said, man is by nature a social animal. This is amazing that all those thousands of years ago, he knew this. And now we have hundreds and hundreds of studies that support this whole thing. One researcher that you may be well aware of is Brene Brown. And she's amazing. She's a social worker and a researcher. And she spent an entire year of her life interviewing people, doing all sorts of research and correlating all of this together to understand the what role connection plays in our lives. And that whole year of all the information and data she gathered came down to one sentence: we all need connection. And she went on to elaborate. She said, we are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, to belong. When those needs are not met, we don't function as we were meant to. We break, we fall apart, we numb, we ache, we hurt others, we get sick. Can any of you relate to this? I know I can. I know there have been times in my life where I've been isolated in some way for some reason. And this is always my cue. And I try to keep this passage in mind because it is your litmus test as you're breaking, you're feeling sick, you're falling apart, you're feeling numb, you're not functioning as well as you should be. How often do you then stop and say, am I getting enough connection in my life? Because that may very well be the problem. And that's why it's so important that we're talking to this group of people and caregivers whose connections may be falling by the wayside in their caregiving journey. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of studies that talk about how important connection is to us as human beings. And I don't want to give you death by studies because most people's eyes glaze over. You show them a graph or a pie chart, they're out of their lunchtime nap. But I'm going to share two with you because I think they're really interesting and they illustrate this really well. The first one I'll call the mortality study. And this one was actually done here in Utah at BYU. And it has become one of the most famous studies on connection. If you read an article about connection or see a study, you will almost always see this study cited because their findings were so stunning. What they did was they took a bunch of other research, 148 other studies about connection and isolation, and they correlated all the information together, however these smart people do that, just to come up with the answer to see how much social isolation influences our risk of death. And this is what they found. Social isolation creates a risk comparable with well-established risk factors for mortality, such as smoking, alcohol consumption, and exceed the influence of other risk factors such as physical inactivity and obesity. So feeling socially isolated is as bad as smoking. It's worse than being morbidly obese. That's what they found. That's huge. And I love this quote from one of the researchers in this study who expounded on this. He said, "We take relationships for granted as humans. We're like fish that don't notice the water. That constant interaction is not only beneficial psychologically, but directly to our physical health." The first time I read that, I didn't quite get the fish part of it. I had to think about it. But think about it. Here you have this fish swimming in this water that they're probably not even noticing is around them, and yet it's what keeps them alive. You take that fish out of the water, it's dead. And we're like that as human beings, as we go about our lives, having these little interactions and connections with other people that we may not even be paying attention to. This also is life-sustaining for us as well. And we may not even notice it. This next study I want to share, I'll call it the hand study. I think it was done at the University of Wisconsin. And I always consider it a little bit of a barbaric study because what they do is they take this group of women and they put them inside of these MRI tubes so that they can study their brains throughout the experiment. They can see what their brains are doing. And then they tell the women that at some point during this experiment, you are going to receive an electric shock. Well, what do you think their brains do? They can actually see on the MRI that the anxiety centers in their brain just light up, They're scared, they're anxious. But then the researchers have someone, perfect stranger, reach into the MRI tube and take the person by the hand. And this is what happens. And I'm sorry, I get a little choked up whenever I do this one. When the women felt the other person's hand, activity in the anxiety or the threat centers in their brains plunged. Just the touch of even a stranger's hand in that moment of anxiety calmed them. This is powerful stuff. These connections that we're swimming in our lives and not even noticing, they are powerful for our health and our well-being. So now think about your journey as a caregiver and how just a little bit of disconnection or isolation as you feel that need to pull in like that turtle or to put these barriers up around your house to protect yourself. Just think about how a little bit of that disconnection is impacting you. And think, we always make sure we have gas in the tank of our car so it can drive, or groceries in the refrigerator so that we have food to eat. But are we thinking about the connection that we need to function properly, as Brene Brown said? Do we think about that? This is important. And if you go back to that study, that mortality study, you realize that having connections, good connections, fulfilling connections in your life are as important as taking your blood pressure medication, as treating your diabetes, as getting exercise or eating right. It's just as important. But how often are we even thinking about it? How often are we thinking about it in that way? Almost never. So as caregivers who need to put on their oxygen masks to protect yourself so that you're there and you have the bandwidth to care for your loved one, I want to challenge you to think about it. I want to challenge you to make it a part of your healthy being and your health regime. I think it's important to think about it maybe a little bit more along these lines. We have an emotional bank account, connection bank account. And as you go through your life, you have this bank account where, say, you were here at this conference and you're talking to somebody in that room and you find that you're having the same experience and you don't feel so alone in that experience. Ka-ching, that coin goes into your bank account. Or somebody smiles at you while you're walking down the hall. Ka-ching, that goes into your bank account. All of these experiences you're having, or maybe you notice somebody else and they look a little out of place and uncomfortable. So you reach out to them. That counts too. That's connection. And ka-ching, that goes into your bank account without you even realizing it. So we want to make sure that we are putting money in that bank account. We're not always tapping into it to the point that your bank account feels bankrupt and you feel depleted. So we also need to be thinking about, sorry, my slides are a little jumbled for some reason. Okay. So I love this quote from this psychologist, Dr. Art Markman. He says that the interactions we have with other people affect the way that we feel about life. Our close relationships keep us grounded and influence both happiness and the sense that we are part of a larger community. Interestingly, and this is why I highlighted this because I really like this part about it, even our interactions with people we don't know that well give us a sense that we are part of that larger community. Those interactions and belonging increase our happiness. So all of these interactions, again, contributing to our well-being. So it's important maybe for us to think about connection a little bit more like this, like a vital nutrient that impacts our health and enriches our lives. And you know, you hear a lot about vitamins. You need this nutrient, you need this vitamin. And what we know about that is you need a recommended daily dose, whatever that is, of those vitamins. So we need to be thinking about it more in relation to our health, not just having fun or whatever, all of these good things that friendships and relationships do for us, but also what it does for our health. Now, usually at some point, somebody will come up to me afterwards and say, well, but I'm an introvert. I'm kind of shy. I don't think I really need connection. And so what I will tell that person is, yes, you do. You absolutely do. We all need connection. Some people are super, super social. They're just like, they have to be around people. That is their oxygen, to be around people all the time. So they may need a lot of connection. And that's where you have to make yourself your own science experiment. Go back to that Brene Brown quote where she's telling you, if you're not functioning properly, you need to pay attention because that may mean you're not getting enough connection. So some people need a lot. Introverts might need less connection with fewer people, quieter connections with people that they trust. But I've thrown this into my presentation as part of it, just for all of us to recognize, no, whatever your social needs are, you need to make sure that those are being met. So at this point, I hope you're seeing that connection is important. Can I have some of you nodding your heads yet? Is that sinking in? That this is important. And it's vital for your survival and to have that oxygen you need to be there for your loved one. So what I want to shift gears to just a little bit is to start talking about, well, what do I do? I have these real demands on my life. We went through that list where, things have changed for you. It's harder to have those relationships. Maybe those relationships have fallen away a bit. What do I need to do? Well, first of all, I don't want to diminish what you're going through because it's very real. So what I want to talk about is creating a plan. It's just like with anything else. If it's a priority, if it's an important, you need to create a plan to accomplish it. Just like, you want to exercise more. Okay, I'm going to get up in the morning 15 minutes earlier. I'm going to do this many whatevers. It's the same principle because if you don't think about it, it won't happen. It just won't happen. But this main thing I want you to understand, this is the key takeaway for you caregivers, is to focus on what you can do, not what you can't. Because if you get stuck in that place of saying, well, I used to be able to drop everything and just run and go to the movies if I wanted to, or, gosh, it's so hard to get out and do things. If you get stuck in that place, you're just stuck. So you need to focus on what you can do. So what I'm going to do is show you now a plan that I created for myself at a time when I was feeling really stuck and isolated and overwhelmed. And I read this Brené Brown quote and realized I'm not functioning very well. Maybe I need some more connection. Maybe I'm going to listen to what she said. And so I created this plan I call my 2x4 plan. If you think of the big wood plank 2x4 and how you can build a structure out of it, that was kind of what I was visualizing. I'm a really visual person. Now I'm going to show you my plan and I'm telling you, this is my plan. This doesn't have to be your plan. If it works for you, great. What I want you to do is create your own plan that will work within your world, within that world of what you can do. One of the big principles about this is when you put energy towards something and thought towards something, life makes a way for that thing. You start to see opportunities that you wouldn't see before because you weren't thinking about it before. So, as I said, create a plan. My plan is this 2x4 plan. So what it involves is that 2 times a week, I try to reach out to a friend or a family member. These are usually people I'm closer to. This can be a text, it can be an email, a phone call. Kind of depends on what I'm doing in my life, how busy I am, how busy they are. One of those phone calls, usually I try to call my mom if I can. She's in Arizona. Hi, Mom. She's out there virtually watching today. So I try to call her. And these are people I'm closer to. And again, it's that I'm just thinking about, I'm planning. And there's this magical thing as I'm sitting there thinking, who am I going to call this week? Who am I going to connect this week? Just that process of getting out of your own head, getting out of your own thoughts and your own problems to think about somebody else. That in and itself is a healing thing as well. So 2 times per week. Then there are 4 things I try to do each month, and that's the 4 part of it. So once a month, I try to schedule a lunch or dinner date with a friend. My friend Mandy there, we're going to lunch tomorrow. It could be movies, it could be anything like this. And it will take some planning for you as caregivers. Admittedly, it will take some planning. It will take bringing in your support group to allow you to do this. But you can ask for help. I give you permission. You can ask for help. I try to do something where I can actually talk to people. If you go to the movies, you don't have as much of an opportunity to talk. So I don't have a lot of time. I'm super busy. And so I want to optimize. I want it to be a good experience for both of us when we go. So I try to do something where we can talk. Then once a month, I try to send a card or a letter to someone. I call this going old school. Who on earth sent out the memo that says we cannot send cards and letters anymore? I mean, all of a sudden that just dried up and went away. And yet it is a really, really valuable way to connect with people. And I learned this from some older ladies who live in my neighborhood. I literally have a stack about this high of cards that I have received from this little group of little ladies who love me. And, you know, it can be thank you for this, or I hope you're feeling better. I heard you were sick, or happy birthday. It really uplifts me. But here's the amazing part for you as the person doing it. Again, as you're thinking about this process of who can I send my card or letter to this month? Who do I feel like needs this? It again takes you out of your own thoughts, your own problems, and allows you to kind of connect virtually to this person as well. And this has been a really good thing for me. And then once a month, I make a phone call to a family member or friend I haven't spoken to in a while. Like my brother and sister, they have a lot going on in their lives, and so we don't connect that often. So I make sure I'm rotating in and calling one of them each month, or my nieces, or a cousin maybe that I know. COVID opened up a lot of opportunities because we learned this virtual thing. So I started connecting with an old college roommate virtually. And so I cycle her in every once in a while and connect with her. And that's been great. We hadn't spoken in years. And just in September, she drove from New Mexico just to come visit with me because we had made that reconnection. And so being creative and thinking about it, who can this person be that I'll reach out to? Again, is a really big thing. My husband is super good at this. He stays in really close contact with a lot of distant relatives and friends. And during COVID, he learned that you could do these games online and also connect virtually. So he set up a standing game night every single Friday where family members can just join this Zoom link virtually and play a game together every Friday night. I'm not sure that we've missed a Friday night except occasionally. So be creative, have fun with this. It doesn't take that much time. It really doesn't. You have to carve out that time and make the plan. And then once a month, I try to step out of my connection comfort zone by connecting with someone new or someone I don't know that well. Now, when I first created this plan, I had a lot more time in my life. And so I really maybe went a little overboard on this, challenging myself, but I would do some crazy things like, oh, I met this person once. So I call them up and say, hey, do you want to go to the movies? Or, yeah, you hardly know me, but let's go out to lunch. I do things like that. And I tell you, it was amazing. I've had amazing experiences with doing that. So I still try to do it. But for me now, I just don't have as much time. So again, I'm focusing on what I can do. And for me, this is when I'm out in public, something like this, I challenge myself to talk to people. Or if I'm in the grocery store standing in line, I'll maybe try to talk to the person next to me. Or it can be a smiling at somebody, challenging myself to smile at somebody. I had a really cool experience with this a while back. I was at Costco and I was going through and I was thinking, I haven't done this month. So I thought I'll talk to somebody. But you know how Costco is. It's so bustling and noisy. You get up to the checkout stand and so many people and it's noisy. And I thought, I'll just smile at someone. So I'm walking down this aisle and there's this older gentleman walking towards me. And so I thought, okay, locked eyes on him and gave him a big smile. And then I just walked on by. That made me feel really good. I smiled at him. But then I get this tap on my shoulder a little while later and I turn around and it's this older gentleman. And he says, do I know you? And I said, no, I don't think so. And he said, but you smiled at me like you knew me. And I said, well, I was just being friendly. And he said, well, thank you for doing that. That made me feel really good, like I wasn't alone. And man, that just hit me. And I walked away from that experience and man, that filled my connection piggy bank. For a week afterwards, I just kept thinking about that feeling that I had and that feeling that I had given him, which also fills your connection bank account as well. So it's a huge thing. So this is it. This is my plan. It's a very, very simple plan. It's not elaborate. I've tailored it to myself. And what I would encourage you to do is to create your own plan, reminding to focus on what you can do and not what you can't do, with the idea that this is what I'm doing. This is important for me. I have permission to do something important for me. And this is important. I'll tell you, it's very important. So in the few minutes that we have left, I just want to share with you some of I call my bonus tips for connection. And these are things that I've just learned along the way. And I'm repeating some things because they're important. The first one, focus on what you can do, not what you can't do. So important. Then keep it simple. Baby steps. Maybe 2x4 is just way too big for you. Maybe you need a 1x2, if that exists out there. Maybe just one thing a month or one thing a week, whatever that is, a text, whatever that is. You're focusing on something besides your problem, and that's huge. And you're reestablishing maybe some connections that have gone by the wayside that are important to you. Create a broad circle of relationships. I throw this one in there because it's very important and it's not something we think about very often. And I'll tell you, I moved here from another state to Utah, and I remember in the first months of getting here, somebody said to me, you know, I don't really need friends. I have a lot of family around me, and I spend my time with family. Well, family is great. Family is good. But what scientists tell us is that these relationships that we have outside of family with our friends and acquaintances out there, that sometimes those relationships are actually more healing for you, more better for you internally. If you think about going out to lunch with a friend or chatting and having a good laugh that almost makes you pee your pants. And yes, I said that. How uplifting that is. Our family relationships are great, but sometimes our family relationships come with responsibilities, with baggage, with expectations. So make sure you're getting some of both. They're both important. So make sure you're cycling those friends into that circle. Don't be like that one picture with the barrier around it. It's only you and your family inside. You need to have a broad circle of relationships. If time is an opportunity, think of small opportunities. If time is an issue, think of small opportunities to connect more frequently. Text is a perfect example of that. You can text, that takes very little time to do. But again, you're thinking about someone else. So about a year and a half ago, I was at a workshop like this. It was kind of an all-day thing. And I sat next to a lady, and she seemed to be kind of uncomfortable there, like this wasn't her comfort space. And so I started talking to her. And we had this little connection, and we kept talking throughout the workshop. We connected between sessions. We talked. And at the end of the day, we exchanged our phone numbers, not really sure why, and just went about our way. And I didn't think anything of it, except the very next day, I got a text from her. And I thought, wow, people actually follow through when you give them their phone number. And I am not lying to you. I'm telling you the absolute truth. Every single day for the last year and a half, she has sent me a text. It might be a little saying, it might be a little quote, a scripture, a photograph, a meme, something funny. And then I'll respond some little funny thing back to her. And it's so uplifting. And, you know, I've kind of forgot about it. And then this morning I'm rushing around doing my deep breathing because I knew I was presenting. And her text came through. And she said, "You're going to do great." And that was all I needed. And so that takes so little time out of either one of our days. She's leading the way on that. She's the teacher on that one. But it's just an example. And it's been an amazing thing for me. Connect, step out of your comfort zone. We talked about that. Connect through helping others meet their connection needs. If you sit around and wait for people to connect with you, you're going to be waiting. Other people are busy. People aren't thinking about this. You have a greater knowledge. You need to be proactive. If you see that person and you feel like they might need connection, or you have a neighbor that spouse has died and they might need a connection, you need to prioritize that. You need to take that first step. Connect through gratitude. I say, let nothing go unthanked. This is a great way to connect. If you just sat here for a minute or two, I guarantee most, if not all of you, would be able to think of somebody or some situation where it's like, I really should have thanked that person. Maybe all the way back in time to a teacher, may have just been today. Connecting through gratitude is huge because nobody's going to turn you away or reject you if you're telling them thank you for something. It's an easy in, and I've had some great opportunities. So pay attention. Sit down and think once a week. Is there somebody I needed to think? In fact, this morning I thought of somebody, I should have thanked them for that. So I sent a text out really quickly. A great way to connect. And then don't be afraid to network or to ask for help. Huge for caregivers. We like to be independent. I can handle this. I can do it all by myself as you shrink because it's getting harder and harder. Reach out to your local area agency on aging if you haven't already. We have lots of supports for people who are caregiving specifically. Join a caregiver support group. We have them. People are always nervous about joining them, but we get the best feedback from people who attend these support groups because you can relate to each other. You have an instant in to connect with these folks, to share your knowledge from your caregiving journey and to receive their knowledge as well. So I highly recommend joining a support group. There are other ways to reach out and connect. We have a friendly callers program where you can either receive or volunteer to give a call to a homebound, isolated individual. Lots of opportunities. So just be creative. That's all I want to say to you. Be creative, but think about this. Make an attempt to add that connection in your life, and it will enrich your life. So thank you very much today.